What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, and if you're joining us for the first time, buckle up, because you're about to hear one of the most insane survival stories in human history. Now, I want you to imagine something for a second. Picture yourself on a piece of land so small you could walk across it in 10 minutes. No trees, no fresh water, no hope of rescue. The sun beating down at 80+ degrees every single day. Now, imagine not just surviving there, but living there for 15 years. Sounds impossible, right? Well, that's exactly what happened on this tiny speck of sand in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And the story of how these people got there and what they did to survive is going to blow your mind. This isn't just a survival story. It's a tale of human ingenuity, betrayal, hope, and ultimately triumph against impossible odds. By the end of this video, you'll understand why archaeologists consider this one of the most important historical sites in the entire Indian Ocean. Before we dive in, if you love these deep dive historical stories that most people have never heard of, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon. It's free, takes 2 seconds, and it helps us bring you more of these incredible forgotten tales. And if this story amazes you as much as I think it will, drop a like. It really helps the algorithm show this to more history lovers like yourself. Our story begins on a dark, stormy night in July 1761 with a man whose greed was about to change the lives of hundreds of people forever. Captain Jean de Lafargue was having the worst night of his career. Picture this. He's standing on the deck of his ship, Luteal, switching frantically between 2 different maps of the Indian Ocean that completely contradicted each other. It's past midnight, winds are howling at 20 knots, and his ship is being tossed around like a toy in the violent Indian Ocean waters. Any sane captain would have dropped anchor and waited for sunrise, but Captain Jean wasn't operating under normal circumstances. See, officially, Luteal was on a simple supply run, picking up beef and rice from Madagascar to bring back to the Isle of France, what we now call Mauritius. Routine stuff, right? Wrong. Hidden deep in the cargo hold, locked away like animals, were 160 men, women, and children from Madagascar. These weren't passengers. They were enslaved people, destined for illegal sale on Rodriguez Island. Here's the kicker. The governor had recently banned this very type of human trafficking. That made Captain Jean's human cargo incredibly valuable, but also incredibly illegal. We're talking about a potential fortune that could set him up for life, but if he got caught, it was literally a death sentence. The psychological pressure was crushing him. Every hour at sea increased the risk of discovery. Every delay meant more chance of being caught with illegal human cargo. So when faced with the choice between safety and speed, greed won out. He ordered his ship to keep pushing through the storm in complete darkness, gambling with over 300 lives. That gamble failed spectacularly. As dawn broke on August 1st, 1761, Captain Jean made a horrifying discovery. Dead ahead was a tiny island surrounded by a coral reef sitting just below the surface, invisible in the darkness, but deadly to any ship that hit it. Luteal slammed into that reef with devastating force. The sound must have been terrifying. Wood splintering against coral, followed immediately by the rush of water flooding through the massive hole torn in the hull. The ship was sinking fast. The crew scrambled to escape, but for the 160 people locked in the cargo hold, it was a death trap. They had to break out through the very hole that was sinking the ship, fighting against torrents of seawater in complete darkness. When the chaos settled, the devastation was clear. Of the crew, 18 had drowned, but it was far worse for the Malagasy people. Nearly half of them, around 80 souls, never made it out alive. When the chaos settled, about 120 French crew and 60 to 80 Malagasy people found themselves on what was then called the Isle of Sand. And folks, that name was not an exaggeration. Tromelin Island is roughly 1 square kilometer. Imagine 10 city blocks in each direction. The entire island is completely flat, with the highest point just 23 feet above sea level. No trees anywhere, no vegetation except for some scraggly grass, no fresh water whatsoever. The climate? Brutal. We're talking temperatures above 80 degrees Fahrenheit most of the year with zero shade. Food options were limited to occasional seabirds, sea turtles, and fish in dangerous coral reefs. That's it. And remember, these were people from inland Madagascar who had never fished or hunted marine life in their lives. This hellscape is where our survivors found themselves, facing what seemed like certain death. The stress completely shattered Captain Jean's mind. Within days, this experienced sea captain was wandering the beach in a daze, completely disconnected from reality. First Lieutenant Barthélemy Castellan Duvernay took over, but here's where the story gets really dark. Despite facing death together, the racial-social hierarchy remained completely intact. The French crew controlled all the salvage supplies, while the Malagasy survivors were treated as second-class castaways. In the first few days, 8 Malagasy people died from dehydration because the crew hadn't bothered to prioritize finding water for everyone. But Lieutenant Bartholomew had an audacious plan: build a new ship from the wreckage. For 2 months in that brutal heat, they worked around the clock. When complete, they christened their creation the Providence. September 27, 1761, exactly 2 months after the shipwreck, the Providence set sail. Every French crew member who could travel climbed aboard, and then they sailed away, leaving every single Malagasy survivor behind, with nothing but a promise to send rescue. Think about that for a moment. These people had worked side by side for 2 months, but when escape time came, racial prejudice won out over basic human decency. When the survivors returned home, Lieutenant Barthélemy immediately began lobbying for a rescue mission. The governor's response? Absolutely not. France was fighting the 7 Years' War with Britain and rescuing enslaved Africans from an illegal. These inland people with zero ocean experience transformed that barren sandbar into a functioning society. Using sand and coral, they dug pits and built walls. Here's a heartbreaking detail. These structures resembled traditional Malagasy burial chambers, meaning they were essentially living in what their culture associated with death. Food required abandoning lifelong cultural taboos. Sea turtles were forbidden in their culture, but hunger eventually won over tradition. They learned to fish dangerous reefs and hunt seabirds. But here's what makes this extraordinary. Recent archaeological evidence shows they didn't just survive, they thrived. They developed sophisticated metalworking techniques, maintained cooking equipment for over a decade, and crafted jewelry and art. Most remarkably, conditions became stable enough that a baby was born and survived on the island. As years passed with no rescue, 18 survivors built a raft and sailed into the vast ocean, hoping to reach land and bring help. They vanished forever. Years later, 7 more tried again on another raft with an ingenious sail made from seabird feathers. They too disappeared into the ocean. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Barthélemy had returned to France, but never gave up. For over a decade, he wrote letters, petitioned officials, got the media involved, year after year, facing rejection after rejection, but never stopping his fight for the people he'd left behind. Finally, in 1772, 11 years after the shipwreck, the Minister of Marine Affairs agreed to send a ship, but bureaucratic delays meant another 3 years passed before any vessel left port. The first rescue attempt in 1775 reached the reef and turned back. A year later, another attempt got closer before storms damaged their rescue boat, actually stranding one of their sailors and adding to the survivor community. November 29, 1776, Captain Jacques-Marie Boudin de Tromelin finally reached the island aboard the warship Dauphin. What he found was both miraculous and heartbreaking. Of the original 80 Malagasy survivors, only 7 women remained. One was holding an 8-month-old baby born on the island, a child who'd never known any world but that tiny speck of sand. These survivors wore clothing woven from seabird feathers. They lived in sophisticated coral stone buildings with organized kitchens, food storage, and even a lookout tower they'd built to watch for ships. Captain Jacques surveyed their settlement in amazement. These people had created not just survival mechanisms, but the infrastructure of a functioning town. Modern expeditions have confirmed what Captain Jock witnessed. The copper bowls they repaired show evidence of melting and molding metal without proper tools. They crafted rings, necklaces, bracelets, and combs, not for survival, but to maintain beauty and dignity. These weren't just survivors scraping by. They were engineers, artists, and community builders who accomplished the impossible. When offered return to Madagascar, the survivors refused. The compassionate new governor granted them citizenship and freedom. The baby, mother, and grandmother were adopted into the governor's own family. Today, that island bears the name of their rescuer, Tromelin Island. 4 archaeological expeditions since 2006 have turned it into one of the most important historical sites in the Indian Ocean. But this story forces uncomfortable questions that remain relevant today. Whose lives do we value? Whose stories do we remember? The Malagasy survivors remind us that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about maintaining dignity, community, and hope when the world has written you off. On a piece of land barely visible from the ocean, these remarkable people built not just shelters, but a civilization. They turned abandonment into endurance, desperation into determination, and transformed a barren sandbar into home. Their 15-year fight represents one of humanity's most extraordinary achievements, accomplished by people whose names we don't even know, but whose collective triumph over impossible odds continues to inspire us. If this incredible story moved you, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps these forgotten stories reach more people who need to hear them. Make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell if you haven't already. We're constantly uncovering these amazing historical gems that mainstream education somehow missed. What did you think about the Tromelin Island survivors? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing your perspectives, and I read every single one. Thanks for watching. Thanks for caring about these forgotten stories. And remember, every person's story matters, no matter how overlooked or abandoned they might seem. Keep exploring, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next video.